Ryu is arguably the poster boy of fighting games in general. Everyone knows who Ryu is, and his face is one of the most recognizable in all of video game history. The Street Fighter protagonist has been a staple in the series from the very first game, and while it seems Capcom is looking for a way to ease him away from the spotlight, he is still a prominent figure in the Street Fighter story. Ryu is a powerful character and a famous personality, but interestingly, he is also the fighting game protagonist we know the least about. Ryu's origins are an enigma, and theories have arisen because of this. In today's video, we'll do our best to peel back the layers and answer some of the internet's most asked questions about the fighting game legend Ryu. I'm Jammers. Welcome to another DashFight video, and let's get cracking. Ryu's name's simple enough, and a cursory search on the internet will tell you that Ryu's name means dragon. This is due to how it is spelt in kanji. When you consider that, his dragon punch makes a lot more sense. There is also the idea that the dragon motif fits his hero's soul quite a bit. But the genesis of his name goes a little deeper than that. Ryu is actually named after the pioneer of the Street Fighter series, Takashi Nishiyama. In an interview, Nishiyama explained that Ryu was initially going to be called Ryuichi, but this idea was shelved in favor of the much shorter iteration we have now. Nishiyama's name, written in kanji, looks like this. With the third symbol, the same as the kanji used for the word dragon, the word is also used to refer to abundance and prosperity. If you're wondering what his surname is, he doesn't have one. This isn't weird, as very few of the original Street Fighter II cast have a second name, with the exception being Ken Masters and the Japanese rendition of Balrog, which was M. Bison, or Mike Bison. So you see, Ryu's simple name has some pretty deep roots. Ken's name was supposed to be Yu, but we'll talk about that in another video. This is a fun one. So, if you played Street Fighter 2 when you were younger, you might remember hearing some really strange things when Ryu and Ken did their special moves. Some were straightforward enough, like the fireball where Ryu goes, easy to hear, right? But when Ryu says his dragon punch and the hurricane kick, things get a little hairy. When he did the dragon punch, he said, which has sometimes sounded like, "Are you Ken?" Like he was asking each opponent if they were indeed Ken or, "Sure you can," encouraging you to go for that dream job while hitting you with a devastating uppercut. The worst was the hurricane kick, where he says, but it actually sounds like complete gibberish. Actually, what he is saying is Tatsumaki Senpukyaku, which means tornado whirlwind leg, or as it's more commonly called, hurricane kick. This is one of Ryu's core moves, and he shares it with other characters like Ken and Akuma. That said, Ryu's hurricane kick always seems like the best and generally hits the hardest. Between the first Street Fighter and Street Fighter V, the move has undergone some changes, but has remained recognizable and pivotal to the character over the years. But why did it sound so weird? We can't say for sure, but the most plausible explanation is sound compression, which meant that some parts of the move sounded normal, while other parts were poor and difficult to understand. So yeah, that's what Ryu says when he does hurricane kick. The question of Ryu's age is a really common one, and it is a little tricky to answer. When examining when Ryu was born, the easiest way to find out would be to look at what Capcom has said. In later iterations of Street Fighter, we always got the birth date of the character, but never the birth year. For example, Ryu has his birthday on the 21st of July, but we don't get his year of birth. Luckily, Capcom added to the canonical age of the characters into Street Fighter 2, and in that game we get to know that Ryu was born in 1964. If we go with that, Ryu will be 60 next year. Now I'm sure Ryu has good genes and all, but they cannot be that good. It is safe to say that at some point in the Street Fighter canon, the dates have been moved around a bit. Whether we'll actually get the information regarding Ryu's age remains a mystery. Until then, we can only guess and say he should be around 40 years old now. Short answer, no. But that's not all there is to it. How strong is Ryu when compared to other characters in the Street Fighter lore? Generally speaking, fighting game protagonists tend to be really powerful and are often the strongest of the cast. But it becomes very clear very quickly that Ryu is by no means the strongest in the Street Fighter universe. That said, don't sleep on Ryu. He's a strong man. He was able to lift a heavy boulder with Oro sitting on top of it, was able to defeat Sagat and leave a permanent scar, was responsible for defeating Bison in Street Fighter V, and so many other feats. He has also gone toe-to-toe with Akuma, who has shattered an island with his bare hands. Ryu has also created a crater of his own with his fists and broken strong rocks with his Hadoukens. So, all in all, Ryu is powerful and deadly. But we also know by some of his failings that he isn't the strongest. For example, his victory over Sagat might be attributed more to the Satsui no Hado than to Ryu himself. Also, his win against Bison came because Charlie had sacrificed himself to weaken the dictator. Even Ryu doesn't claim to be the strongest and is always on the path to becoming better. As to who the most powerful Street Fighter is, there is great debate whether it should go to Akuma or to Oro. Personally, I'd go with Oro, because when you think that this is a man who fights with one hand just to challenge himself and give the opponent a chance, you might find that hard to argue against. This is an interesting question. The idea of Ryu being Akuma's son has been doing the rounds for decades at this point, but it seems that there is no conclusive evidence to go on. As I mentioned at the beginning, Ryu is one of the most mysterious protagonists ever, in that we have no idea where he came from or who his parents are. Some theorists even believe that Ryu is some sort of weird revenant who is just going from place to place, with no origins we can trace. The truth of Ryu's beginnings are shrouded in mystery. However, the idea that he is Akuma's son has its merits. For one, in the Street Fighter Assassin's Fist and Street Fighter Alpha Generations movie, this agenda is heavily pushed, and we even have a character, Sayaka, who is touted as Ryu's mother. Sayaka is the niece of Goken and Akuma's master, Gotetsu, and was a part in the two men's upbringing. In both Assassin's Fist and Alpha Generations, she is seen to have a romantic bond with Akuma. It is believed that Ryu is the result of their union, but both of these pieces of media are non-canon, and we cannot base anything on them. From the games themselves, we also don't have anything that points to this conclusion. But we do have some lingering questions like, why does Ryu struggle with the Satsui no Hado and not Ken? And yes, you could say that Ken doesn't struggle because he isn't as hell-bent on being the best as Ryu is. But there is something to be said as to why Akuma and Ryu seem to be the only ones who really struggle with it. Then there's the depictions of kanji writings on the back of Akuma's outfit, which we also see in Ryu's stage in Street Fighter 2 and even on his belt in Street Fighter 5. Ultimately, the game has said nothing to this end, and in Street Fighter Alpha the animation, Akuma outright denies being Ryu's father. All of this means that right now, the answer to this question is that Akuma is not Ryu's father. If you are new to the Street Fighter series and have only seen Ryu from afar, you might assume that his style of fighting is simply karate. But this is not true, as it looks nothing like karate. It is also possible to mistake his style for what it was called in the West when Street Fighter 2 was released, Shotokan karate. But it isn't that either. Ryu, and by extension Ken, practice a martial arts style known as Ansatsuken. This literally means Assassin's Fist. The story goes that Capcom America went with Shotokan because they didn't like the idea that the series protagonists would use something so sinister. So they changed it to Shotokan karate. But Shotokan karate, which is a style that really exists, focuses more on controlling space and keeping opponents out, which, looking at Ryu's animations, doesn't seem to tally. But Ansatsuken is more up close and personal, which is evident in his generally short-range normals. For anyone who knows Ryu, he is nothing like an assassin. So is he really practicing Ansatsuken? Maybe not. The story goes that Ansatsuken is an art that has been around for ages, and the original technique was focused on the art of killing and is still practiced by Gen, Chun-Li's master. However, the style of Ansatsuken practiced by many of the old masters was a small deviation from the original in that they tapped into the Satsui no Hado, but ensured they were not consumed by it or melded with it. On the other hand, Goken and Akuma rejected this style of Ansatsuken, with the former unwilling to give in to the killing aspect of the style, and he instead developed the Muno Ken Hado, the power of nothingness, which is what he taught Ryu and Ken. Meanwhile, Akuma instead disagreed with the idea that the Satsui no Hado should only be tapped into. He wanted to master it and become one with it, and he did, which led him to become the raging demon we know today. And that's it. Are there any other questions you have about Ryu? Perhaps we'll get a few more answers about him in Street Fighter 6. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.